Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming to the shir so late at night. We are middle of Iggeres HaKodesh Siman Aleph on page 204. Towards the bottom. Before we do inside, let's recap last 2 weeks. We spoke about the last 2 weeks. So this is a letter that the Alter Rebbe wrote, in which he is addressing the different Hasidic congregations that had sprouted up at his encouragement, at the Alter Rebbe's encouragement, throughout the region of White Russia and Lithuania. And the Alter Rebbe begins thanking the Hasidim for completing the Shas and the Chalukas HaShas. And by the way, as I've mentioned, I think 2 weeks ago, that this practice which the Alter Rebbe talks about over here, which the Alter Rebbe instituted in Chabad, of everyone taking a Masechta, and thereby communities finishing the entire Shas. So that's something which happens every single year on Yutas Kislev. Yutas Kislev is coming Shabbos, yeah. So Mirza Shem and Lubavitch Shuls around the world will be Chalukas HaShas. So now that we know exactly what Shas is all about and what it accomplishes, it's the Chag Rebbeis Masna, as we'll explain in a moment. So it's taking the time to be Mishtatef in this Chalukas HaShas. I'm assuming that next door they'll have one. I believe there's a Farbrengen Matzah Shabbos over there, so you can go Matzah Shabbos and.
This Shabbos or next Shabbos?
No, next Shabbos. Yutas Kislev, next Shabbos, yeah.
I figured it out.
We have next Shabbos is Rosh Hashanah, Shachali is B'Shabbos. You know, by Chassidim, Yutas Kislev is known as Rosh Hashanah for Chassidus. So this year we have a Rosh Hashanah, Shachali is B'Shabbos. We had it twice. We had it Rosh Hashanah of Tishrei, and now we're having it a second Rosh Hashanah on Shabbos. So a real Shabbos-dik year, apparently. So the Alter Rebbe thanks his Chassidim for finishing the Shas, and the Alter Rebbe talks about what is the significance of Torah Sheba'al Peh, and as the Alter Rebbe goes on, specifically the halachos of Torah Sheba'al Peh, which where are the halachos of Torah Sheba'al Peh? So we usually be looking at Gemara, but where did the Gemara get the halachos from? We usually look in Shulchan Aruch to find the halachos, but ultimately the halachos are all derived from the Gemara. The Gemara. So what is the significance of that? So the Alter Rebbe talks about that there's the Masnayim. Klal Yisrael, we have a Masnayim. The Masnayim are the loins, the core, the midsection, the foundation of the body, which supports everything else. It supports the head, and it supports the heart, and it supports the upper body, and it supports the feet, the legs, and everything is based on the Masnayim. And spiritually speaking, the Masnayim is the Emunah that we have. But ultimately, our whole Avodas Hashem, from top to bottom, as we said, specifically the Avas Hashem and Yiras Hashem, because Avas Hashem and Yiras Hashem are directly what leads to mitzvah observance. The Zrei said the two arms, the right arm, which is Ava, leads us to do mitzvahs. When we love Hashem, we do mitzvahs. The left arm, which represents Yira, fear, reverence, awe. When we have Yiras Hashem, then we abstain from doing Averis. So the Masnayim, which is the Emunah, is what supports, Vata'ametz, strengthens our Avos Hashem and Yiras Hashem, and ultimately our Maisa HaMitzvahs, our mitzvah observance. However, there has to be the Chagra Ba'oiz Masnaha, and that is that the Emunah itself also needs strengthening. Yes, we all have Emunah because we're Yidden, and therefore Maminim B'nei Maminim. Every single Yid has Emunah, but ultimately we need to strengthen the Emunah, we need to infuse it with additional strength, and that is with Oiz, with Torah Sheba'al Peh. And why Torah Sheba'al Peh? So Alter Rebbe explains the special uniqueness of Torah Sheba'al Peh, that the Gilui of the Ratzon HaElyon, the Gilui of Hashem's Ratzon, is specifically in the halachas of Torah Sheba'al Peh. Although Hashem's Ratzon is expressed from Torah Sheba'al, but it's not revealed there. Which is why if you read the whole Chumash, you would walk away with a very meager and oftentimes wrong impression of what Hashem wants. The Torah Sheba'al Peh is what unlocks and reveals Hashem's Ratzon. And because Hashem's Ratzon is so potent, the Ratzon HaElyon, right? The Ratzon which is at the core of everything, on top of everything. So therefore, by learning Torah Sheba'al Peh, and specifically the halachas of Torah Sheba'al Peh, that incredible light, which is Hashem's Ratzon, which is revealed in there, has the power to strengthen our emunah. And with that, we concluded the first part of this letter, and now we're going to move to the second part of this letter, and the Alter Rebbe is going to shift gears. The Alter Rebbe is going to tell us the next part of the letter from now until the end is going to be about davening. The Alter Rebbe is going to say, yes, we strengthen our emunah through studying Torah Sheba'al Peh, and specifically the halachas of Torah Sheba'al Peh. However, that can all be hidden. It can be in a way, it can be concealed. And as we all know, we could sit down and learn halacha in Shulchan Aruch or learn daf of Gemara, and we don't walk away feeling necessarily that our emunah and our avos Hashem and yiras Hashem has been strengthened. But the truth is, whether or not we're aware of it, we have strengthened the emunah. But when do we reveal that emunah which has been strengthened through the Torah study? That is when we daven. Davening is the time of the revelation of the strengthening of a Yid's emunah, which happened through studying Torah Sheba'al Peh. So a person can learn a lot of Torah Sheba'al Peh, a lot of halachas, and not feel the desire to do mitzvahs. Not necessarily, not in the mood. Doesn't have the cheshek. I don't know what the word in English, the proper word in English for that. Some words don't have the best words in English, maybe in another language. What?
Drive and motivation.
The drive, the motivation, yeah. They say in Hebrew, lo bali, right?
Desire.
Yeah. And davening is what gives us the push, the desire that even if you're not interested in something which is you'll find uninspiring, but it's not that davening generates, that davening is actually only revealing that emunah which was strengthened through the Torah through learning Torah Sheba'al Peh. The Alter Rebbe elsewhere in a Maimer, the Alter Rebbe compares this to a coal.
A what?
A coal, C-O-A-L.
C-O-A.
Yeah, which is smoldering.
A piece of coal.
So you need to fan the coal in order for the fire to emerge. So when we learn Torah Sheba'al Peh, so it's like the fire is in the coal. It's not revealed. And the davening is the fanning of the coal, fanning of the emunah, brings it out into a revealed place. And we know that sometimes we have things that we have them. Let's say this person can have a strong feeling, but it can go by years. You don't even, you don't express it, you repress it, whatever it may be. And one day it's fanned and it comes to the fore. And the same thing is also the emunah that we have, and the emunah that we have naturally, and which is strengthened through learning Torah Sheba'al Peh, that is revealed through davening. And therefore, davening occupies a very, very important place in Chassidus specifically, because it's where we reveal the emunah, which strengthens our avos Hashem and our yiras Hashem. And the whole system of Chassidus is based on our relationship with Hashem and developing our relationship with Hashem and revealing our relationship with Hashem. And when does that happen? That happens during davening, which is why davening is such a huge emphasis by Chassidim. I think I've mentioned this in the past. You know, we spoke about next week is Yutas Kislev, which is the anniversary of the Alter Rebbe's liberation from prison. Why was the Alter Rebbe put in prison? What was his crime? It's funny that when you talk today to people, you know, in prison, what was he doing in prison? What white-collar crime was he convicted for? But you have to realize that back in the day in Europe, to have sat in prison was
terrible.
It was terrible, but it was like if you were a Yid and you sat in prison, it was like, okay, like what were you put in prison for? What libel was trumped up against you? And here specifically, the Alter Rebbe, we know he had opponents. There were opponents to Chassidim, and they libeled the Alter Rebbe, and they basically said the Alter Rebbe. They said a lot of half truths. You know, complete lies don't fly, but a lot of half truths. And among the things they were trying to convince the Tsar was that the Alter Rebbe was starting a new religion, and the Chassidus wasn't Yiddishkeit. And they were hoping that the Tsar would not be happy with a new religion sprouting under in his country, and they were talking correct. But the Alter Rebbe, he was faced with different proofs that Chassidus was a new religion. Those who concocted these stories, they wrote it up. They wrote up a whole document and they sent it to the Russian government. And today we have that document because the archives had been, after the fall of the Iron Curtain, so the archives were unsealed. We actually have the whole file of the Alter Rebbe, his prison, his interrogation. And one of the things that the opponents, the Hasidim, said, that one of the proofs that Chassidus is a new religion is that they spend so much time davening. Daven for a long time, and that's not Jewish. It's Jewish to daven up quickly and then to go learn Torah. Torah is the main thing. Talmud Torah K'neged Kulam. Talk about how today the world has changed. And today when we talk about Misnagdim and Hasidim, they're not really accurate terms for many reasons. And really talking today about Misnagdim is a misnomer. Are there some Misnagdim? Probably, but very, very few. Very, very few Misnagdim. Sorry?
Yeah, there are.
But they're very few. And the main thing is that even those who proclaim themselves to be Misnagdim have been extremely influenced by Hasidus. And many of their beliefs and their practices are totally taken from the Baal Shem Tov and from Hasidus. So you can scream until you're blue in the face that you're a Misnagid, but then if you go and if you daven a long Shemoneh Esrei, you daven Shachris for an hour, you're essentially following a practice which 200 years ago was scorned by the Misnagdim, and they thought that was a Chassidic practice. So today, Chassidus and its influences have really spread universally. But davening was always a cornerstone of Chassidus because Avos Hashem and Yiras Hashem was a cornerstone of Chassidus, our relationship with Hashem. And where do we take, what is the time that our relationship with Hashem is nurtured and cultivated and brought out to the fore is during davening. So again, the real work, where do we fill up the gas? We fill up the gas when we learn Torah Shabbal Peh. That's really when we're filling up the gas of our emunah. And then when we daven, we're turning the key in the ignition. Okay, that was 20 years ago. Today you press the button or the keyless, whatever it may be. But that's davening is pressing the ignition, but you need the gas which is provided by the Torah Shabbal Peh. So that's the transition Alter Rebbe is making up until now. He's talking about Torah Shabbal Peh, which that is what gives the strength to the emunah. But the revelation is during davening. Let's do this inside. Page 204. However, 9 lines from the bottom of the page. However, Eis was man hachizuk ve'imutz hazreis v'areish. When taka do we strengthen the hands, the arms, which are Avos Hashem and Yiras Hashem, and the head, which is our contemplation into Hashem's greatness. Kishas tfilas hashachar. In general, it's davening, but specifically, it's shachris. Shehi shas rachamim, because it is a time of rachamim ve'eis ratzon ha'elyon l'maylam, and a time of divine grace from above. Which is interesting. It's not the time davening. The reason why davening is so effective is not only because we put in the effort during davening, but actually, the time of davening is a very propitious time. It's a eis ratzon from above. That when we daven, we can connect to Hashem at that time, and we can reveal our emunah, our Avos Hashem, our Yiras Hashem, and strengthen all of that. It's a special time.
Only Tfilat HaShachar is that ratzon, or the whole Tfilot?
So this obviously is connected to this week's parsha. We have V'hinei Sulam Mutzav Arsa V'Reishei Magia Shamayma. Talk about Yaakov, the ladder in Yaakov's dream. And we know that Yaakov's dream, the ladder, is a metaphor for davening, because davening is the ladder which we climb up. Mutzav Arsa, we start off on the ground. We start off in the morning rubbing our eyes, and we're not in a very spiritual mood. But V'Reishei Magia Shamayma, by the time we finish davening, we're up in the heavens already. And we know Yaakov was Masakin Tfilas Arvis Taka, right? Mm-hmm. But this week's, I think the Baal Turim says that the word Sulam is the same gematria as Koil, as HaKoil Koil Yaakov, the idea of the voice of Tefillah. But actually, there's also a very interesting connection to the end of this week's parsha, and that will answer your question also about Shachris. Before I get to explanation, let me take a little of a detour. Today in Lubavitch is a Yom Tov. Why? Today, Yud Kislev is the day when the Mittler Rebbe went out of prison. In Lubavitch, we have a lot of prison and freedom Yom Tov.
A lot of ex-cons.
A lot of ex-cons, yeah. It was considered as chus. There was a letter that the Rebbe writes to a chassid. There was a chassid whose name was Yitzchak Golden. And he was a chassid yet in Russia. In 1880, after the Rebbe Rayatz, the previous Rebbe became Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe became very, very ill. I mean, we're talking about life-threatening illness with typhus. And he served the Frierdiker Rebbe. He was the attendant to the Frierdiker Rebbe at that time. And he had learned in Lubavitch and Tomchit Mimim in the Lubavitch Yeshiva. He was imprisoned for several years for his efforts on behalf of Yiddishkeit. Anyways, eventually he got to America and he wrote a memoir. And he sent the memoir to the Rebbe. I don't remember whether he began with the words or ended with the words. He wrote the words, Kol Yemei Shenoisai Ra'im, which translates as, my entire life has been one miserable life. So the Rebbe responded to him in a letter, which is printed in the Rebbe's letters. And to paraphrase, the Rebbe says, how can you say that? How can you say that you had a bad life? You write in your memoirs that you had the schus to serve the Rebbe. And you learned in Temchet Mimim. And you were zoiche to sit in prison. You're zoiche to sit in prison for teaching children Torah. Even in prison, you also were also doing your shluchas and you were spreading Yiddishkeit in prison also. If after all this you say that you had a bad life, I have no idea what a good life is. Eineni yedea mahu toiv ba'olam. You're describing for me the best life possible. You learned in Temchet Mimim. You served the Rebbe. You were imprisoned for teaching children Torah. Even in prison, you're spreading Yiddishkeit. Can there be a better life than that? Can there be a better? Sitting in prison for activities in behalf of Klal Yisrael was considered as chus. So the Mittler Rebbe was the son of the Baal Tanya. He was his oldest son. His name was Reb Doiv Ber. He was named after the teacher of the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe's teacher was the Maggid of Mezrich, Reb Doiv Ber of Mezrich. He was born a little less than a year after the Maggid of Mezrich passed away. He was born in Tov Kuf Lamed Daled, which equals 1773. And he was born on Tes Kislev, which was yesterday. And his yard site is on Tes Kislev also. He's born and passed away on the same day. We know Chazal tell us about tzaddikim that HaKodesh Baruch Hu fills their years exactly, precisely. So yesterday, sorry? Yeah, Malish Neseyim. Him L'yoyim Meshana L'shana. So he passed away in the year Tov Kuf Peches. He passed away, he was a young man. He passed away in the year 1827. So he was born, what did I say? I said he was born in 1773. So he was wrong. He was 54 when he passed away on his 54th birthday. And then on Yud Kislev, which is today, was his Chag HaGeula. And look, in Chabad today we don't say Tachnun. On Yud Kislev we don't say Tachnun. So it's 2 days. You know, other Rebbes have a birthday and a yard site and a day when they went out of prison. So you get to celebrate them for 3 days. But him, it's all compacted. His birthday and yard site is Tes Kislev. And his Chag HaGeula is on Yud Kislev. So usually there's a Farbrengen last night between the two. And we have Farbrengen devoted to the Mittler Rebbe. But yeah, Lubavitch. Sorry? Yes, in Chabad we say Tachnun on birthdays and on yard sites we do. Yes, but on Chag HaGeula we don't. So, yeah, so it's a busy day in Lubavitch. Though many Lubavitchers yesterday were busy with birthday celebrations in honor of the birthday, various forms of celebrations, birthday, the yard site, and then today's the Chag HaGeula. Now, although the Mittler Rebbe was a Rebbe for only a relatively short period of time, we're talking about his father passed away in 1812, and he passed away in 1827, so he was a Rebbe for around 15 years. His output of Chassidus was phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. If you turn around, you look over here, you'll see the whole bottom shelf over here, called Mamari Admur Ramtsoi, and then that top shelf over there, all the Sfarim on the top shelf, are all the Sfarim of the Mittler Rebbe. Yeah, it's 2 shelves. We're talking about around 25 Sfarim. And in 15 years of his Nesias. And what he was known for his prolific Chassidus. And what he expanded greatly on his father's Chassidus to the point that in Chabad, we look at the Alter Rebbe, the Baal Tanya, as the Chochma of Chassidus Chabad. And the Mittler Rebbe as the Bina of Chassidus Chabad. Bina, which is associated with Rechoivis HaNahar. The Chachma is the Mayan, Chachma is the wellspring. Bina is known as the Rechoivis HaNahar, the river, which is the wide river. He developed the ideas of his father in an incredible way. He would say Mamarim for hours and hours and hours and hours at a time. I believe he once said a Maamar for 14 hours. There's a story, I believe, if I remember correctly, he was once visited by Rabbi Kiva Eger, and he said, And he said a mimer, and the Kiva Eger fell asleep in the middle of the mimer. That's if I remember correctly, as the story goes. And his head was what? Rabbi Kiva Eger, yeah. That's I'd have to research the sources of that, but that's what's said. And his head was literally in the clouds. They said to him he didn't know what a tzuras hamatbeya is. He didn't know what a coin looked like. And we have the Likutei Torah and Torah of the Alter Rebbe. So there's Mamarim over there. If you open up a Maimer and Torah you'll see a Maimer over there, one page. Then you open up the Torah's Chaim of the Mittler Rebbe, you'll see the same Maimer, which is 25 pages. In other words, that which the Alter Rebbe gives in one page, he'll do 20. The Alter Rebbe gives 3 pages, he'll give you 45 pages on it. Taking the ideas and expanding incredibly on the ideas of the Alter Rebbe. The idea of Bina is Vayiven, right? Bina Yisera Nitna Be'isha, women have a greater Bina, because Vayiven es Hatzela. Bina is connected to the idea of building and constructing. So he was released. Yud-Ki, you might not have heard of Yud Kislev so much, the Yom Tov, which is today. It's not as great as Yud Kislev. And the reason is because the Mittler Rebbe was released from prison on Yud Kislev in the year Tov Kuf Pei Zayin, 1826. And the Chassidim had very, very big plans to make a huge Yom Tov on the next year on Yud Kislev, but the Rebbe passed away Tes Kislev, the day before the first anniversary of his, so that obviously put a damper on the celebrations, and so it never took off to the same extent as what Yud Tes Kislev took off.
Who sat longer in prison?
Who sat long? They both, well, the Alter Rebbe sat a little longer. They both were taken to prison right after Simchas Torah, and the Mittler Rebbe was released on Yud Kislev, and the Alter Rebbe on Yud Tes Kislev. But the Mittler Rebbe, his conditions in prison weren't as bad. The Mittler Rebbe was an ill person. So therefore he was under house arrest. He was not in Lubavitch. They took him to the city of Vitebsk, which was the capital city of the region, and he was put under house arrest. And he was on house arrest until Yud Kislev.
What was he arrested for?
It was complicated. It was actually family politics. There was a nephew who was jealous of him and about a Yerusha and libeled him, but ultimately he was...
Outright Mesira.
Yeah, it was an outright Mesira over something which was completely untrue. When he was in prison, so as I mentioned, the Frierdiker Rebbe was an ill person. He passed away young. Again, he passed away at 54, and he was visited by doctors. And one of the chief doctors told the government that for his health, he needs to say Chassidus. It's negatively impacting his health that he doesn't have Chassidim to say Mamarim. So he was allowed in house arrest. They gave a certain amount of, I think twice or 3 times a week, a certain amount of Chassidim were allowed in, and he would say Chassidus. What?
Minyanim also, yeah.
Sorry?
He gave Minyanim also, I heard.
I don't remember.
Minyanim?
Yeah, it's possible. But the Chassidus, he had special dispensation to say Chassidus as a medical need. As a medical need to say Chassidus. That's how deeply he was attached to Chassidus. And when he passed away, so he was very ill, and he was unconscious, and the Chassidim thought that at any moment he would pass away. And his son-in-law, the Tzemach Tzedek, who succeeded him, he went over to him and says, please say Chassidus. Mittler Rebbe sat up, and he started saying a Maimer Chassidus. And in the middle of the Maimer Chassidus, when he reached the words, Ki imcha mikor chaim, after he said the word chaim, he was nostalgic. Tzemach Tzedek said about him that since the times of the Rashbi, there hasn't been a histalkus of this sort. Tzemach Tzedek said about him, if you would have cut my father-in-law's finger, not blood would have come out, but Chassidus would have gushed out. That's what he said about him.
Tzedek was his
Son-in-law, yeah, and nephew. The Alter Rebbe had a few children. He had a few sons and a few daughters, and he had a daughter whose name was Dever Leah, who was the mother of the Tzemach Tzedek, and he had a son. And the Tzemach Tzedek married his first cousin, the daughter of the Mittler Rebbe, and so he was his uncle and his father-in-law. So in this week's Parsha, there's a Maimer. If you open up the Torah towards the end of this week's parsha, there's a maimer which is less than a page. And it's on the pasuk of Vayashkem Lavan Baboiker. It's a pasuk in the end of this week's parsha. We're all familiar with Vayashkem Avram Baboiker, but the end of this week's parsha it says Vayashkem Lavan Baboiker. And correspondingly, in Teres Chaim of the Mittel Rebbe, there's a 10-page maimer. When I say 10 pages, I'm not talking about small pages. You call it 10 very long pages, double-columned pages, elaborating on this maimer of the Alter Rebbe.
Very little,
Sorry?
very little punctuation.
Yes, well, that's standard in the Torah literature of that time. By the way, the Mittel Rebbe wasn't only Chassidus, but also we have. If you look, you can see. I'm sure you have over there. He has Shuvas and Nigla also. He wrote Shuvas and Halacha. Where is it? I don't see it over here. I don't see it over here, but maybe they have it in a different place, the Nigla's farm. But Al Kapanim, he was also, he was a big goyin also in Nigla. So the Alter Rebbe explains, and as elaborated by the Mittel Rebbe, we know that one of the concepts in Chassidus is that everything has a shayrish in Kedusha. Even something which seems to be negative, everything has a shayrish, everything has a source in Kedusha. Lavan also has a source in Kedusha, because Klippa doesn't emerge from a vacuum. Ultimately everything emerges from Hashem. Lavan actually derives from an extremely, and is a perversion of, you can argue, of extremely high level of Kedusha. In fact, even higher than the Ovis, even higher than Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, Avram represents Chesed of Atzilus, and Yitzchak represents Gevura of Atzilus. Yaakov represents Tiferes of Atzilus, which is Midas HaEmes, Midas HaRachmim. Lavan represents that which is called in Kabbalah the Loiven HaElyon, the supernal whiteness. Now, white in general is associated with Chesed, as opposed to red, which is associated with Gevura. Loiven HaElyon means the Chesed, which is even higher than Atzilus. Hashem's unlimited Chesed, which is well beyond Atzilus. In fact, he was so high, Lavan, that you had to make a separation between him and Yaakov. If Yaakov was in Atzilus, you had to make a gal to separate between them. That's the symbolism of the parsha. Vayashkim Lavan Baboiker means that every single morning, because morning is a time of chesed, boiker, the idea of light, every single morning, not only do we have Vayashkim Avraham Baboiker, Avram is chesed, and by the way, Tfilas HaShachris is by Avram, but we even have a higher level than that. We have Vayashkim Lavan Baboiker. There is this incredible Hisoirus, incredible awakening of the highest level of Hashem's Chesed every single morning, and that level actually empowers us to be able to daven and to be able to connect to Hashem in a very meaningful way. It actually, Vayinashek Levanav Levnaisav. The Mittel Rebbe goes on and explains every single detail of the pasuk, but obviously, Lavan, what emerged from Lavan? Bila, Zilpa, Rachel, and Leah, the 12 Shvatim all emerged, because he is the source of them, and he gives them, by kissing them, he gives them the power to serve Hashem in a much more meaningful way. And obviously, I'm simplifying a very deep maimer of the Mittel Rebbe, based on a maimer of the Alter Rebbe, but ultimately the point over there being that the fact that we daven in the morning is not just a matter of, wake up in the morning, it's the first thing, so let me daven, and if I put in enough effort, then my effort will make it work. Actually, every single morning there's an incredible sayata deshmaya, there's an incredible assistance from above to be able to daven the Lavan, which is a level of chesed, even higher than the chesed of Atzilus, even higher than the level of Avraham Avinu. So back inside, the Alter Rebbe says, the time, again, the appropriate time to strengthen our emunah, to strengthen our avos Hashem, our yiras Hashem, our esboinus is during davening. Vilazoyis, and therefore, the Alter Rebbe says, Oisa avakesh, mevakshei Hashem. The Alter Rebbe is going to get very personal over here in the rest of the letter. Remember, I told you that in Iggeres HaKodesh we're going to get to see a little of a personal side of the Alter Rebbe and his relationship with Chassidim that we have not yet seen in Tanya. This is what I request, the Alter Rebbe says, Mimevakshei Hashem, from those who seek Hashem, Yavinu v'yaskilu yachtav. I want you all to understand. I want you all to contemplate this. V'liyes l'zikarna b'nei I want you to remember well. Kol ma shekasafti aleim ishtakad b'chlal, whatever I wrote to you last year. Remember, this is a letter that followed a letter that Alter Rebbe wrote the previous year, which is the last page of Tanya, with Alter Rebbe strongly admonishes the Chassidim regarding appropriate behavior during davening. So Alter Rebbe says, I want to remind you, when you daven, it has to be, davening is a serious matter. Ubifrat be'inyan kavanas hatfilah, especially I want to remind you, but the idea of the importance of having kavana when you're davening, mu'umka deliba, from the depths of the heart, yoim yidirshun Hashem, every single day you have to seek out Hashem, b'chol libam, with all your heart, b'chol nafsham, and with all your soul, v'nafsham tishtapech kamayim, your soul should pour out like water, noichach pnei Hashem, before Hashem, u'kamayim erazal b'sifri, as our sages tell us, and it's brought down in the Sifri, ad mitzui hanefesh chulu, that davening has to drain you to the last ounce of your neshama. You have to daven with every single last ounce of your energy and your ability. The actual Alter Rebbe is demanding of his Chassidim. That's what Alter Rebbe wrote last year. The Ata Hapam, the Alter Rebbe continues and says, now, Hinini Yosef Sheinis Yadi, I'm writing you a second time. B'tei Sefes Bir, with even more explanation. Ubakasha Kfula, and I'm redoubling my request. Shtucha u'perusa lefnei kol anshe shleimim, and this is my request that I'm extending to all the members of the Anash, all the members of the Chassidic community, Hakrevim v'archoikim, those who are near and those who are far. L'kayim aleim, the Alter Rebbe is saying, I want you to take it upon yourself, shekol yimei hachol, that every day of the weekdays, lo yirdu lefnei hateva habalei asakim. I don't want, the Alter Rebbe says, I don't want that the Chazanim should be business people. She'ein lan panai kol kach, because they don't have time, they're running off to their job, and therefore the Chazanim should not be business people. Rak, rather, who should be the Chazanim? Oisam sheyesh lahem panai, those who have time. Oi, or hamalamdim, the malamdim. Apparently the malamdim have time.
They do. They do.
Either that, or maybe the malamdim are able to have their talmidim with them during davening also. But for whatever reason, the malamdim weren't rushed. The Rebbe wants the chazanim should not be rushed. Oi, hasmucham al shulchan avim, or those who are on kest, those who are sitting and learning in koilel, they have time. Sheyicholim laharak b'tfilas hashachar, these have the ability to daven shachris. Erech Shah Umechza Lepachis Kol Yimei Sachel. The Rebbe says, I want davening during the weekday to take approximately at least an hour and a half.
Where do you find this?
Right here. You just.
No, I mean, where do you find a minion like that?
Where do you find a minion like that?
I don't see that. I've never seen it.
Yeah, no, don't come to 770 to find that.
No,
Very quickly in Chabad.
Sorry.
They done very quickly in Chabad.
Okay.
I can't keep up.
Apparently, we're not living up to the expectation of the Alter Rebbe. The bottom line is, everything that we're going to be learning up now, it's very easy to go and point fingers. But when you point a finger, where should it be pointed at? There you go. This is Alter Rebbe is asking me, asking you. It's pointless to go and say, well, what about other people? This is Alter Rebbe talking to me and to you. Telling us davening should take an hour and a half. At least.
Starting my roof tonight.
Sorry?
Is it only chakras or?
No, chakras. Chakras, yeah.
Chakras alone.
Call you, yeah.
Thank God.
Mehem, from these people who have the extra time, they should be with Chazanim and only them. Alpi HaGirl, how do you choose? So amongst those people who have the time, either you make a lottery, or you find the Chazan who is
Very nice.
right. Who Yesef loves the Chazan has an additional job. In addition to being a Chazan, the Rebbe says the job of the Chazan is to gather around him. Kol hasmuchim al shulchan avim. All those people who have time, the people who are again in koilel, being paid by their parents. Malamdim sheyuchlu l'harach, gather a minyan around them so they can also be ma'arich. Bival yeshunen novina. The Rebbe is saying, please, I don't want you to veer from what I'm saying. Please, please, please. Now, what about those people who don't have time to daven an hour and a half? Some people have time. Some people are retired. What about the person who doesn't have time? So here the Alter Rebbe doesn't talk about it. But if you look later on, the Alter Rebbe, if you look on page 322, can learn a little of that of now. And Mitzvah Hashem, by the time we get there, you'll all forget what we learned, so we'll be able to learn it again later.
Yeah.
This is another letter the Alter Rebbe wrote. Let's read a little over there. Alter Rebbe writes, Hine. Loi toiva ashmua shamati vatirgas bitni. You know, it's funny. Our letter begins with our letter.
Hine.
Peiskin bebracha levarach loheidis lashem kitoiv shmua toiva shama vatchi nafshi. Our letter begins. Alter Rebbe is taking Hashem because the wonderful news that he heard. This letter begins. Alter Rebbe says, "I've heard bad news, and my stomach has churned. My innards have churned." Asher am Hashem mavirim lifnei atevo isha chafetz b'chaim b'richas yam shel kol anash b'mikdash mi'at tazet shel anash. What happened was they removed from being a chazan someone who was chafetz b'chaim, someone who wanted to live, and he wanted to live for a long life, not for himself, for everyone. K'maimer azal shloisha dvarim arichim yamav shel adam ve'echad ma'mamayach b'tfilas. Chazal tell us there are three things that give a person long life. One of them is a daven's long. So basically, there was a chazan who was spending a long time davening, and he was fired. He was removed from his position. And you can say, not surprisingly, right? Imagine, probably many of us go to shuls where if there's a chazan who's taking long, he'd also be fired. Alter Rebbe says, I'm horrified by this news. This chazan, what does he want? All he's looking for is to extend the life of everyone.
The whole community.
Sorry?
The whole community.
Yeah. And then he continues, Alter Rebbe says, well, you're going to say, oh, but I can't. I have to run to work. You can't wait. There's no way you can wait until after answering Kedusha of the Chazar Shashatz of this Chazan. Better don't hear Kedusha and Baruch Hu. Than to go and to try to shorten the lives of those who want to live. So you can't stay there. So you're pater. There's a rule. If due to circumstances beyond your control, you can't do something. So you're pater. You are pater from hearing Baruch Hu and hearing Kedusha and hearing. Even you go off to work, you should know the chatan is moitzi. Ki'ilu shama. It's as if you heard Chazar Shashatz. He brings down from the Gemara. He brings a proof from the Gemara that for the people who have jobs and they can't be in shul, so the chazan is moitzi them, even if they're the am shebesadas, the people in the fields. So that really fills in a little of the blank over here. Here the Alter Rebbe says that I want the chazan to be someone who's going to daven for long, an hour and a half. And we know that in the reality of life, not everyone has an hour and a half every morning to daven. So here the Alter Rebbe doesn't say it, but in the other letter the Alter Rebbe writes, no problem. You don't have an hour and a half, you daven quicker, you go. But the chazan, the minyan, has to daven an hour and a half, which is very interesting because the Alter Rebbe, what he's seeking to do over here, and which he succeeded in doing Bechsidim. Although the argument maybe today is that we've regressed a little. Maybe that's a legitimate argument, but there's definitely, for several generations of Chassidim, this was the standard, was that the way many people thought of it is the minyan davens regular pace. When I say regular pace, I don't mean an hour and a half. The minyan davens finishes off in 40 minutes. You have some people who want to daven long. Okay, so they will be the outliers. We know that in every Lubavitcher shul, historically, in Europe, there was it's called a cheder sheni. There was a second room, which is also known as a chabadnitza, and that was where the people who wanted to daven for long, they davened. But when we say they want to daven for long, I'm talking about people who daven not for an hour and a half. These were people who would daven 3, 4, 5 hours a day. Yeah. So there was a special room in a Chabad shul. One of the Rebbes wrote a letter. You're not allowed to daven in the shul if there is no Chabadness there. He said, in other words, every shul has to have that room for people who want to go daven at length.
Still practice it.
Yeah. There's still people who do that. Absolutely, there are people who daven for. I'm not going to say that it's the norm, but there are still people who daven for many hours. Yeah.
So what about it said that Hasidim Rishonim hayu mechavnim before the tefillah for a few hours, between the kavanot or between this chazan for a few hours, it's the whole day.
No, so what Rabbi Shua ben Levi said, Halavai shispal hadam kol yom kulei.
You know for a fact.
Yeah.
You daven 4 hours, 5 hours.
Yeah.
What?
That people, you're talking about every day. You're talking about on Shabbos.
He claims every day.
Before Baruch Hu, for Shabbos.
Every day?
No, not every day, for Shabbos.
Oh, for Shabbos.
See that?
How do you mark the tefillas?
When I was a bacher, I had a friend who davened a few hours every single day. My brother told me once about a certain friend of mine who I know who this is. He went on a plane with him from Eretz Yisrael to New York, or I remember, or vice versa, and he put on his tefillin by takeoff, and he took it off at landing, and he davened the entire time. There is.
How long was the flight?
There was no kfitzas haderech, even though that's the theme of this week's parsha. Yeah.
How you mark the tefillahs? What could...
There's a chassid who just passed away recently, within the last few months in Eretz Yisrael. His name was Rabbi Lisan, older chassid. He must have been. And when I was in Kfar Chabad in 1994, so we would go Friday night to watch him daven after our meal. He had a thing. Every Friday night, he would daven for a few hours. Kabbalah Shabbos Maidev for a few hours. Every word, bekoil, with nigunim, a few hours. We'd finished our meal, we'd come, he's still before l'chadoidi.
Daven Iggeres?
Iggeres, yeah. He was there by the minyan. He answered Amen and Baruch Hu. But then he probably looked to find the minyan that davened at his pace and couldn't find it.
What was his name?
Lison, I forgot what his first name was. He was a son-in-law of his family. Got used to it. There was a famed mashpia in Eretz Yisrael. His name was Rabbi Shlomo Chaim Kesselman. I think we spoke about him a few weeks ago. It was his son-in-law. This was his son-in-law. He passed away this year, maybe last year. And I remember going to watch him daven. Yeah.
So how he had tefillahs?
Remendel Merazar, Rav Yechanan's grandfather, right?
Yeah.
So he used to tell me his memories of his father's tefillahs. He said his father would start davening 1 o'clock in the afternoon. In other words, after all his achanas, daven hours on end, and he had no clue what was going on around him when he davened. He said his father's eyes were open when he davened, and he was completely oblivious to his sermonics. Completely oblivious, and davened for hours.
How you mark like that?
Sorry?
I don't know how you go about to be marked so many hours. You know, Pirush Milas, so what could you think about for that?
All this.
Back then,
So that you have to be educated.
And a charami. Yeah. There
I barely get...
But the main thing over here is... Yeah, okay.
Film is very hard to understand.
Right. Okay, so that's something that you can work on. And learning Pirush Milas, yeah. Yeah, there were definitely Hasidim who were like that. In the previous generations, it was quite common. And later generations, it became a little less common, right? There were more Iksid V'Shicha were like a heel. I think I told you a story that there was a video that went around of a Kretschnefer Chassid. A Kretschnefer Chassid, he's not a Lubavitcher. You can see by his lavush. He said he heard from his Rebbe, the Kretschnefer Rebbe. The Kretschnefer Rebbe was survived the Holocaust, and in the DP camp where he was, there was a Lubavitcher Chassid. And he said this Lubavitcher Chassid would wake up every night at midnight and begin his achanas for davening. He would start davening at the crack of dawn, and he would finish davening every day at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And he said the Kretschnefer Rebbe said that he would go very often to watch this sight, stand in the next room and watch the way this Chassid davened. And he said that what most impressed him wasn't even the tefillah, that at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, after 16 hours of between the achanas and the davening, the Chassid would be wrapping up his talis and tefillin, and he would be singing to himself a Chassidish song that goes like this: Es in es zach schlaf in schlaf zach was all menta nasid davin zach nicht, which means translates are eating is natural, sleeping is natural, and what should I do? The davening is hard. It's hard for me to daven. This is Chassid after 16 hours. Back upon it. But we see over here what Dr. Rebbe was trying to do was reverse the trend. He wanted, no. The people who daven short, they're the outliers. The minyan davens long, an hour and a half. The minyan davens long. You can't make it to the minyan? Okay. No one's blaming you. We understand you have to make a parnasa. But you're not. But you're the exception, not the rule. The rule has to be davening visadarf. You can't, so you're the exception, which is different than what many people thought it should be. No, that the people who daven long should be the exception. Now, obviously, the Alter Rebbe said the minyan should daven an hour and a half. There were Chassidim who davened much longer than that, so they were the exception to the exception. But the Alter Rebbe was trying to change the paradigm and create by Chassidim the paradigm that the people who the standard minyan is the long minyan. However, b'Shabbos is v'yomim toivim, and Shabbos and Yom Tov, shigam kol bali yasakim yeshlan penai. Also, the business people have time. There's no excuse on Shabbos and Yom Tov.
Shas HaKodesh.
The Shas HaKodesh, then it's an appropriate time. Laharich with filasam, that even businessmen can be ma'irich and davening b'kavana slibam v'nasham l'Hashem with kavana. And this is something which exists. The idea of davening Shabbos barich is something that exists to a greater degree today in Lubavitch Osan. You'll see even Taka business people comes a Shabbos And they daven for several hours. That's something which is not uncommon. Not uncommon. And says the Alter Rebbe, not only can business people daven on Shabbos, but to the contrary. Aleim mutal b'yeser seis v'yeser oz. They have a greater obligation to daven at length on Shabbos, greater than the Talmidei Chachamim, greater than the Melamdim, or greater than the people in Koilel. As it says in Shulchan Aruch Eirach Chaim, there it says over there, it says that Talmidei Chachamim on Shabbos are allowed to take a little break and allowed to sleep a little more and eat more. But business people, it says in Shulchan Aruch, on Shabbos they have to learn more. Shabbos is given for them to learn more. Before he says that's what it says in Shulchan Aruch. And what does it say in Teiras Moshe? 6 days you work. The Yom HaShvi Shabbos LaShem Alikacha. Shabbos LaShem. Shabbos is devoted to Hashem. Daike Kulei LaShem. Shabbos is completely for Hashem. Yom Tov, we know it's Atzeres Lachem. Shabbos is Kulei LaShem. Shabbos is holy. So on Shabbos you have to not only have Shabbos, you have to daven at length because in Shabbos you have time, but also because Shabbos is a spiritual day. Now Shabbos, the emes of Oinig Shabbos of a Chassid is not the chalent, it's not the nap. Shabbos is a time when you have 25 hours and you can daven and you can learn Nigla and you can learn Chassidus, and that's the emes of Oinig, taking a break from the world and reconnecting and recharging your spiritual batteries. So Shabbos, the Alter Rebbe says everyone has to daven at length. The Lazais, and therefore Gam Heim Yerdu Lefnei HaTeva b'Shabbos v'Yom Tov. So on Shabbos and Yom Tov also the business people can go can be Chazanim. Again, the Alter Rebbe during the week he says they can't be the Chazanim because they don't have the time. But on Shabbos and Yom Tov they can. Al Pi HaGeirel, once again, either based on by lottery or by agreement of the majority. Kamesha Kasafti Ishtakad, as I wrote last year.
We have that letter from last year?
Yeah. It's the last letter printed in Tanya. It's the last page of Iggeres HaKodesh. The last page of Kuter Sachra. Yeah. And this is something which in general, I think by Chassidim in general, and Chabad in particular, the idea of understanding that Shabbos is Shabbos LaHashem.
Was that the letter you bought before?
No, that was Leitei Vashmua. Now I'm talking about Iggeres Techiach. So, for example, in Chabad, sleeping Shabbos afternoon is frowned upon. I think in most of the religious world it's considered a chiyuv, an absolute right, an essential, inalienable right, guaranteed by the Constitution. Shina can also be Lashon Mishnah from learning.
What did you say?
Shina l'Shabbos, kind of.
She means learning. We should not.
Yeah.
This time of year too.
But it wasn't in sleep also.
Shabbos afternoon, going through yeshiva, in the yeshiva system, Shabbos afternoon, you bring Shabbos afternoon, you learned. To waste Shabbos, you want to take a nap Wednesday afternoon. On Shabbos LaShem, you're taking a nap. What's up? It's not the time. Shabbos is a holy day. I have very, very strong memories of yeshiva. The meal would start 2-3 o'clock in the afternoon, the Fabring, because that's when the Mashpiyim finish their davening. In other words, the Mashpiyim daven taka for hours. So sit over there, the different great Mashpiyim. Maybe some of you heard of Medal Futterfas. So he would daven till 3 o'clock, and he would sit on a Mekiddush with the Bachram and the Fabring for a few hours, and it was Shabbos LaShem, taka a holy day. Shabbos, you wake up early, learn Chassidus. There was no Shabbos is a serious day. Not serious as in Yom Sum Chaschem Ela Shabbos. Shabbos is a happy day, but in terms of it's not a light day, it's not a vacation day. Shabbos is a day of his alus ruchnis, a day of spiritual avodah. Yeah. So the Alter Rebbe is making strong demands of these minyanim. Again, this letter is written to the shuls, asking them. You're saying that davening has to be the davening the way Chassidim daven, an hour and a half, and first of all you ensure that by making sure the chazanim are the proper chazanim. Alter Rebbe continues and says, at this point, I want to let you know something. And buckle your seatbelts, because we're going to read something very, very interesting. The Alter Rebbe says, it is my intention, God willing, I plan on sending to all the Chabad minyanim, meraglim b'seiser, secret spies. Leida, and these spies will find out, Ulohidia, and they'll let me know. Kol mi she'efshar lo, v'chol mi sheyesh lo penai. Whoever has the ability to, and whoever has the time, laharich ula'ayin b'tfilah, to daven for a long time and to focus on the davening, umisatzel, and the person is being lazy and is not doing so. Yeh nidoin berichuk machem, that person will be judged and he'll be pushed away. He will be distanced. Liyes nitche b'shtei yadayim, he'll be pushed away with two arms. Bevoyi lepoyi, when he comes here to the altar, we say when he comes here, l'shmoya dach, to hear Chassidus. Umakla lav ata shemaya hein, and from the no you understand the yes. In other words, that the Alter Rebbe is saying that the opposite is also true. That these spies will tell me if they see someone who davens taka the way he's supposed to daven, that when the person comes here, that person will be drawn near and drawn close with two arms also. So Alter Rebbe says, I'm not playing games over here. This is not, he says, Alter Rebbe in general was an incredible Baal Seder. Alter Rebbe was a very big Mesudar. And everything he did was very, very precise. And one of the areas in which he was a big Baal Seder was in terms of visiting the Alter Rebbe. You couldn't visit the Alter Rebbe whenever you wanted. You were not allowed to visit Liyashna. You're not allowed to visit the city where he was whenever you wanted. There were certain designated times. Otherwise, you had to get Rishus to come. It wasn't a free-for-all at all. The Chassidim who came was in a very Mesudik way. And the Alter Rebbe says that people who you're coming here to hear Chassidus, that's amazing. You're coming here to get my bracha, that's great. But I demand. It's not a free-for-all. You can't come and freeload and enjoy the Chassidus that I'm saying and get my brachas and then go off and do whatever you want. No. I have my demands. My demands are that you should daven like a chassid. You daven like a chassid, there's no problem. You come, we'll embrace you with open arms. But if you come over here and I find out that you're taking what you get over here and you're abusing it, you're not using it properly, then you're not going to be
welcome.
You're not going to be welcome. Very, very strong words. Very strong words.
Did they listen? The Kehilot?
I don't know. I don't know if we have. I mean, we know that by Chassidim Chabad, davening was a very important thing. I don't know if we have actually any documentation of these spies that Alter Rebbe sent, although if he said he would, I'm sure he did. But I have not heard any stories associated with this. But this is very shocking, strong words that you don't have, like in L'Kutei Amarim, we don't stumble across these kind of things. Like I said, in Iggeres HaKodesh, we get a more personal look of the Alter Rebbe and his relationship with the Chassidim. And the Alter Rebbe was demanding. He gave a lot to Chassidim. He gave the Tanya, he gave the whole Chassidus Chabad, but he had his demands also. L'Shem Im Yudam, and to those people who listen, it will be sweet. V'tavei aleim birkas toiv. They will get the bracha of toiv, of goodness. Ve'ein toiv ala Torah, and goodness is Torah. Blessing of the bracha of Torah v'gana. So this is the first letter of Iggeres HaKodesh. Next week in Yirtzeh Hashem, we're going to start the second letter. And as I was telling Rav Moshe before when I walked in, the Hashgacha Pratis, because next week's letter, if you look right on top of it, it says Achar Biyasi Mepeterburg. This is a letter that the Rebbe wrote right after Yutas Kislev. It was a letter to the Chassidim telling the Chassidim how to react to his liberation from prison. Next week, next Shabbos is Yutas Kislev, so we're going to start that letter in Yirtzeh Hashem right before Yutas Kislev. So the
timing is good.
Timing is perfect, right?
Perfect. Yeah.
But to recap the letter that we just finished, Siman Aleph of Iggeres HaKodesh, what the Alter Rebbe has done in a way has reframed davening and learning. That normally we learn, we think that maybe that the reason why we're learning Torah and what we accomplish through learning Torah is that we're amassing knowledge. But as we already know from learning L'Kutei Amarim, we know that learning Torah is a lot more than gaining information. It's a lot more than that. I think we spoke about this last week about the Yevanim, right? Lashkicham Torah Sacha. We spoke about this last week, right? Learning Torah is about Kedushas HaTorah. And Kedushas HaTorah means the connection with Hashem, which the Alter Rebbe speaks about a lot in L'Kutei Amarim. But over here, the Alter Rebbe brings out a different angle, which is that learning Torah is not only about connecting to Hashem, but there's a very special power that Torah has in terms of strengthening our emunah. So someone has issues maybe with their emunah, even though we all have emunah, we're all aminim b'nei aminim, but a person's feeling a weakness in emunah. So number one is you have to start learning halacha. Gemara and halacha, that's what the Rebbe says over here. The Gemara and halacha is chagra ba'oz masnao. If the masnaim are Emuna, chagra, be'oiz. If you want to add oiz, you want to add strength, that's the learning Torah Sheba'al Peh, and specifically the halachas of Torah Sheba'al Peh. So that's number one. So this is a different perspective. And when I'm sitting down and learning a piece of Gemara, or learning a Sif and Shulchan Aruch, that there's something incredibly deep going on, you're infusing yourself with an incredibly high oil, light of Hashem, which strengthens your emunah.
Nach is also part of the...
Torah Sheba'al Peh? No. And also not the whole Torah Sheba'al Peh. We're not talking about the Haggadah. We're talking about the halacha Shabbat Torah Sheba'al Peh in Gemara or in other places in Torah Sheba'al Peh. And similarly, the Alter Rebbe also reframes the idea of davening. Now we look at davening as bakashas shrachav. We look at davening as many people consider davening, the essence of it being the idea of asking for our needs. But we know that Chassidus puts a deeper emphasis, not so much on the asking for what we need, although that's very important. And you can even argue that halachically that constitutes the core of what davening is. But ultimately, davening is about connecting to Hashem and bringing out the emunah which we have. Bringing the emunah which we have to the fore. I think we've talked about this in the past, that we don't daven because we have needs because we need a daven. It's like, imagine you send off your kid to yeshiva somewhere. Theoretically, you can give you're going for 10 months, here's $1,000 spending money. No, you don't do that. You give your kid $100, you say, you want more? Call me. Call me, I'll give you some more. When that finishes, I'll give you another 100. Why? You create the need in order to create the connection. That's Hashem created us that we have needs. Why? So that we should daven. And what happens when we daven? When we daven, we connect with Hashem. And we realize our reliance on Hashem. We think about Hashem. And ultimately what that does is that reveals the emunah which we have within ourselves. The emunah which we strengthen through learning the halachas of Torah Sheba'al Peh. We reveal that when we daven, when we have that connection with Hashem, and that's the davening of a chassid, the learning of a chassid, which is a very different and a higher level, and with a greater and with a higher intention within it. Okay, Shabbos, everyone, and I'll see you Mir Hashem next week.